Welcome to the Q Mind Body podcast. My name is Darren, and in this podcast, we talk about all things having to do with gay men's health, wellness, spirituality, and personal growth. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking to Joel A. Davis Brown. I've known Joel for so long that I only know him as Joel. I have to get the full name. He is the author of The Souls of Queer Folk, and we are going to be talking all about that and how we can step into greater leadership roles in the formal sense, as well as just each individual at a time when I believe, at least, the world really needs us. This podcast is being supported by Gay Wellness, which is a website filled with teachers, healers, massage therapists, coaches, psychotherapists, all over the world. So if you're looking for someone you can work with in your area, I will post a link to that. You can also find links to all of Joel's work. His website is joeladavisbrown.com. And I will post links to his social media and his book on Amazon as well. I'll also post links to my work and how you can get involved in the Q Mind Body community, including our Facebook group. So, with all that said, I'm going to bring in Joel. Joel, it's so good to see you.
Good to see you. How are you?
I am so good. I'm so I love that I love seeing your name on a book, and having known you for all these years, it's just Joel, this cool guy in my life.
And it should still be just Joel. Yeah.
Well, I love seeing your name formally on a book. So let's talk a little bit about you first and what led you to writing this book, both your professional and educational background, but also your personal journey. What brought you to this book?
Very good question. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity and the invitation. So a long, long time ago, actually it was May, make sure I get the date right. It was May 14th, 1995. My father came to visit, and during the visit, he and I were sitting in University Avenue in Minneapolis, and he said, "How are you, son? What's going on? What's new?" And I said, "Dad, I'm gay." And he kept eating his eggs, passed me to pass the salt and pepper. So then we walked around the campus, and he said, "Son, I noticed that you're quiet. I don't know if you're okay. Is something going on?" And I said, "Dad, I'm gay." And he said, "Let's go get some ice cream." And then the third time, as we continued around the campus, he got closer to my dormitory, and he said, "I just keep getting the sense that something's bothering you." And I then remember yelling, "Dad, for God's sake, I'm gay." And it led to an argument. And I remember at some point when I was leaving my dormitory room, he said, "Go do whatever it is that you do, that you all do." And as I walked across the Washington Avenue Bridge in Minneapolis and went to the intern office where I was clerking for that year, I remember thinking, why is it that people are so obsessed with what we do, but fail to understand the basic element of who we are? And that very question of trying to understand what it means to be a gay man, what it means to be queer, what it means to be a member of the LGBTQ community has been kind of a lifelong curiosity and a journey. One that led me to constantly ask the question, why is this not being answered? And why is this not being answered in a way that's satisfying and non-stereotypical? And oftentimes I found that a number of people, both outside and within the community, would answer it in a very superficial, almost dismissive way. So this question, this idea of LGBTQ culture and gay men's culture was something that was just simply reduced to sex or pronouns. And I never found that to be really accurate and true to my experience. And so it led me to do research as part of my graduate school program. And I was really fascinated by the answers. And then in doing the research, I realized that the impact of what I found had much greater implication than just simply helping to redefine what it meant to be gay or what it meant to be LGBTQ. And that's how we got here with the book.
Let me explore that a little bit with you, because I think our coming out story sometimes rarely, occasionally, people get from their parents or friends and whatnot, like, yay, great, let's celebrate. But frequently, we get different versions of your story where it is either I don't get this, or I'm morally opposed to this, or culturally it doesn't jive with my reality and you're challenging my reality. Please stop making me uncomfortable. What was, where do you perceive your father's sort of, I'll call it his uncomfortableness. You can correct me if I'm using the wrong word. Because that, of course, bleeds. We didn't just fall out of an apple tree.
Right, right.
We were raised in various cultures, religious homes, families. So I'm wondering, like, what was his source of discomfort?
It's a really good question. I think his source of discomfort was just his upbringing, his family system, his cultural system, his place of origin, right? So
Mm.
oftentimes when we think about this stuff, we have to go back to what is it that helped construct our worldview. And so I think, given what I know of my father grew up in a very racist part of the country, and he grew up poor. He grew up without his own dad. And so, in order for him to make sense of his reality, he fell, or I shouldn't say he fell, he found appeal in, um, I would say, modern day or conservative Christianity. That was how what helped him piece his world together. And it was through his religious philosophy that he also came to believe that LGBTQ people were sinful, no more so than the rest of us, but sinful nonetheless, and that being gay or giving into quote unquote homosexual desires, I smile as I say that, was the reason why this was something that was impure. It was going against the Bible. It was going against any type of Christian edict. And so that was his foundation, right? And so when we had this conversation, I was very much challenging everything that he knew, everything that he believed in, the very principles that he built his life and his philosophy on. So his reaction was not positive. So there was no party, there was no celebration. We didn't go out for drinks or anything like that. And it was a dynamic that we dealt with until he transitioned about a year and a half ago, and it's one that is not unfamiliar, as you alluded to many people in the community.
Yeah. Um, well, I think you're bringing up something that is present in your book, um, and I would love your thoughts on this, and that is the idea of intersectionality.
Yeah,
That I'm not just a gay man. I'm a white gay man. I'm a recovering Catholic gay man. I'm
mm,
all of these different things that make up me as a person, and they all intersect with each other. And so my experience is different than yours, is different than the many people that are listening to us right now. I'm wondering if you could say what that means for you, maybe tease that out a little bit, and why it might be important to consider that.
just to understand. So when you say, what our experience is like, just in terms of what it's like to go down this path as an African American uh, queer man, perhaps, or
Yeah, well, that would be your experience. I
yeah,
think we're all sort of coming to the queer table with our culture, our
sure,
race, our religion of origin, or like the generation we were born into,
right,
right?
yeah. Well, here's what I would say. Being African American, you grow up and you kind of have an idea, a clear sense of what that means to be African American or to be black. So you have people who've come before you to say, here are the lessons, here's the history, here's what it means. And there's kind of, I won't call it a roadmap, but there are guideposts to make sure that you know not only how to survive, but also how to thrive and how to really access your blackness. There are things in terms of the community element. There's things in terms of the soulfulness element that are very clear, that are very well defined. And they're not debated. They're not treated as ideas that are kind of ridiculous or silly. These are things that are taken very seriously. Now, contrast that with coming out as a gay man and coming up as a young gay boy in the north side of Milwaukee, where there doesn't seem to be this well defined sense of what it means to be a gay man. There doesn't seem to be this well defined or accepted aspect of what it means to be queer. Everything seems to be negotiated, interrogated in such a way that when you take on, or as I took on this idea in the sense of who I was, it wasn't very clear. And the only things that were being communicated to me were things that, again, were stereotypical things that were coming from outside the community. Now, being Black, we knew how to deal with that. We knew that, for example, a lot of the narratives that were circulated around what it meant to be Black, a lot of them were false, a lot of them were injurious, a lot of them were nonsensical. But there was still this, for me at least, this question of, well, what does it really mean to be a gay man besides having same-sex attraction, and all those sorts of things, and not really getting satisfactory answers. And so I think it was my experience being a Black person that also helped inform and say to me, we need to do more investigation and give more credence to this idea of what it means to also be a gay man in a way that really felt authentic, real, and I would say a little bit more sophisticated than what it was before.
Yeah. Um, well, one of the things about your book that I think is refreshing and particularly needed this time at this particular time is highlighting. I think like I don't know how old you are, but we're sort of in the same generation where I grew up in. There was a lot of talk about tolerance, and
Yeah,
I guess that's a baby step. But at the time, it seemed like be more tolerant. But to be tolerant is to just say, I'm going to tolerate your presence. I'm not going to celebrate your presence. I think at this moment, when we see like DEI under attack, um, your book is sort of like the counterpoint to that. You're saying queer people, our experience, who we are, can be a benefit. It's not just something that you accept in the workplace or in society, but can have this powerful lesson for us all, whether you're queer identified or not. So I'm
yeah,
wondering if you could speak a little to that and maybe tie it into what we're all experiencing at this particular moment.
absolutely. So what we're dealing with right now, I don't know, I don't want to use profanity on your program, but what we're dealing with right now, a lot of social scientists have called it VUCA. And I just want to assure your listeners this is not a new strand of COVID. So VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. That's the world we live in. So whether we're looking at what's happening between the Ukraine and Russia, or we're looking at climate change, whether we're looking at just having dealt with COVID, certainly what's happening with the Trump regime, and I'm using that term very intentionally, there's a lot of uncertainty in the world. And so the key for anyone as a global citizen is to figure out how you negotiate this new landscape with some greater clarity, certainty, some agility, some deftness. So the opportunities for people to be more adaptable. Well, when we think about volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, who has more experience dealing with that than gay people? We have learned to deal with discrimination in terms of volatility. We've learned to deal with uncertainty in terms of what do our lives look like? Can we necessarily map out where our future is going to be given all the things that are attacking us, haunting us? There's certain complexity that we have to navigate, whether it's in terms of our family, whether it's in terms of relationship, whether it's in terms of how we build our community, how we negotiate and stand in the world. And then there's ambiguity because things are not always clear. The rules are not always explicit for a queer person, for a gay person, for a member of the LGBTQ plus community. So that's where I think this, as I looked at my research, I realized, well, this has greater import than just for us. Certainly, I want people who are LGBTQ identified in whatever way they are to look at the book and say, there's something I can learn here. But realizing that what we do, that we've been doing since forever, in terms of being ourselves and being able to deal with a world that's uncertain, unstable, other people could benefit from. So now we're not looking just at queer people as interesting and fun and the people that you go hang out with during Pride weekend, the people that you meet at the bar. We actually are teachers. We actually have wisdom. We can be savants in terms of how we negotiate the society. So that's where the book takes it to a different level. So it's an idea, it can be read at many different levels. It can be read from the standpoint of, hey, I'm a queer person. I just need to understand what my super talents are. I'm an ally. I want to know more about the community. Or it can be read at a level of, I need to understand how to be better just in the world and looking at the LGBTQ community and gay men as a case study to say, well, if they do it and they're not just surviving but thriving, then maybe there's something there that I should probably check out, and I should probably uh, try to experience a little bit of that because they seem to be doing it and doing it well. And how do I know that? Because we're still here, we still exist, despite all the
Yeah.
different obstacles that we have in society.
It was interesting during COVID, which was awful for all of us, but it was interesting talking to my straight counterparts, having lived through the AIDS crisis, which was a very different pandemic, but it felt like it would never end, like there would
Right.
never be a solution. Finding ways to find joy at that time of darkness. And I remember so almost coaching some of my
Hmm.
straight counterparts, like, I've been through this before,
Right.
like we'll get through this as a people. It's going to be awful. I don't want to sugarcoat it, but we will find a way through this somehow. And I hear what you're saying. Like, so much of what we've been through prepares us to lift others up as well.
Well, exactly. I mean, you actually bring up one of the examples I talk about in the book. So we had this global pandemic, COVID, and a lot of people said, well, how do we get through this? We've never been through this before. And I remember speaking in different places. I actually was in India, virtually that is, and speaking to an international crowd and saying, well, we actually have had a pandemic because HIV and AIDS, and we actually have experience in dealing with this level of deprivation. And we have a community, a cohort that knows how to do this and do this well. And to your point, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be without its challenges, but we have a community that has been through these things and knows how to, again, not just survive, but to thrive. And that's really the key thing. How do we make sure we get through these types of challenges with joy, with a level of clarity, stability, groundedness, wisdom, connection, community, um, being self-realized and self-actualized? We have practice doing that. The only difference is we don't have practice in many instances of seeing what we do and how we navigate every single day without the applause and the adulation of crowds and society as something that the world needs. We don't recognize in many cases that what we do, that you probably have done for a very long time without thinking, this is no big thing. That is something that can help out the world at large. So if you were, if we take it from the superhero context or from the comic books, which my nephews are into, and I sometimes get into myself, and they talk about, you look at somebody who's flying all the time, like Superman, and that becomes pretty routine. I think the same analogy applies to gay men. We have to recognize that a number of the things that we do, whether it's code switching, learning how to build community in a way when there's relatively little to hold us together. Those are skills and talents that the world needs that we've done because out of necessity, out of survival. But other people need to be taught those, and we shouldn't just assume that those things are easy or straightforward or that those things are matter of fact. They're not. But those are things that we've been able to do, and I think there's opportunity for us to take this knowledge to a greater audience.
I love what you're saying, but I'm wondering how. I mean, like, I agree. We have these sort of superpowers that are forged in the fire of the challenges of being queer. Uh, And I love the idea of sharing that with the world, but how?
When
Like,
you say how, are you speaking in terms of like the actual
uh,
day to the practice of
yeah,
like how would you transmit this knowledge, or how do we do it given some of the hurdles that we face socially and politically, or both?
perhaps both. Both. I mean, I guess it depends on who you're talking to. Some people
Right.
are open and receptive to learning new things, and other people are like, no, you've got nothing to share with me.
Yeah.
But
I would say to you a number of the things that let's just look at, for example, this whole idea of being creative. Now, in terms of creativity, sometimes we always think of the arts. So we think of someone singing or dancing or maybe creating some type of movie or whatnot. But there's a process by which you can look at the world and look at problems and say, okay, how can I be creative in my thinking? How can I look at what's there and say, I can actually um, go beyond the two realities or the two options that are posed before me and look at something different? That's called design thinking. These things are not new. There's just the fact of how they've been packaged, how they've been branded, how they've been marketed, and who we've taken that advice from. So you look at a problem and say, what's here? What are some options that have been explored, investigated? What's not working? Let's be open to different possibilities. Let's not just rely on what's been done traditionally. Let's look at other ways of possible. And having that risk tolerance to say, let's experiment. So, how many of us, for example, have experimented in terms of our dress, in terms of our appearance, in terms of our presentation, in terms of our sexuality, whatnot? A lot of what this really is about, Darren, is giving people permission. It is not necessarily about teaching them basic skills of how to go from A to Z. It's about giving them permission,
Yeah.
giving them courage, showing and modeling what that behavior looks like. Now, in terms of how do we do this in a society that at times still doesn't value our wisdom, I'm always a big proponent of focusing on the people who are willing to listen and not spending as much time on those who are hostile or definitively against our interests. I think, they tell you any type of change management, anytime you're trying to work with a medium or a large system, and I'm just going to be a little wonky and be a little nerdy here, it's important to work with those early adopters, those people who are curious, those people who are interested, and say, here's how you can do it. And you do that again by modeling. That's what leadership is about, is by modeling behavior and being vulnerable.
Mm.
As people start to, see your way of doing things, the energy becomes contagious. So think about what you do for a living. Think about the things that how you've been able to transform groups and whatnot. People see it, they get transformed, they tell other people. And then before you know it, you have a movement and you continue to work with those who express curiosity. You create a safe space. You say to people,
Yeah.
this is how you can do it in a very discreet way without asking people to jump from point A to point Z immediately, because that's not a good way to help adults learn. And you show patience, you show care, you show concern, and you build community to support the learning process, the learning journey. That's how you do it. And
Yeah.
again, it's not necessarily meaning that we had to lead a crusade or that we have to go out and walk into, let's say, MAGA country and say this is what you have to do, because there might be people there who are opposed, but there also might be some people who are. But here's what I do know: you're not going to convince anybody to support what to honor our wisdom, to support this idea, to give us the credence that you want if we don't first believe it ourselves. And so, really, I always believe in an inside-out approach. If you don't have
Mm.
the the confidence and the courage, but also the belief in oneself, then it doesn't matter what anybody else will say. So we
Yeah.
have to basically reclaim our narrative and reclaim our cultural heritage and say, this is who we are, this is what we bring to the table, and stop letting that be defined by people who know nothing of our community and don't care about a community. And I think by doing so, we then send the message and give
Yeah.
the example that we do have knowledge that needs to be heard on a greater
Yeah.
level.
One of the things that has struck me about you, I was trying to think about how long I've known you for, and
Yeah,
it's hard to remember a time when I didn't know you. It's been probably 20 years, maybe
it's been a
more. I
while.
mean,
Yeah.
it's been a while. We
It's
were
been a
young
while.
and foolish, and but you've always struck me, even back way back when, as somebody who had that sense of confidence, the way you carried yourself, the way you spoke with authority, and I don't think I've ever heard you actually yell. You're just, but I'm sure you have, just never
Yes,
in
my
front of me.
family
But
will attest to that. Yes, I have yelled. Yes, absolutely.
but you have that ability to stand in your truth, to speak your truth without yelling, to convey and articulate a clear message. And those are all wonderful skills, but they're also very rare. Um, and I'm wondering, how do we cultivate that sense of confidence, that sense of authenticity in more gay men and more broadly in the queer community? How do I mean? It's nice to say that, but how do we do that? How do we arm ourselves before we go trying to share our gifts with the world?
Right. And this is where I'm going to politely disagree with you. I don't know if I agree with the fact that there are a number of gay men or gay people who don't have confidence and don't see themselves in a certain way, don't live with a certain level of authenticity. I think that's the first thing we have to do is let go of, again, the narrative and the story.
I don't think it's just gay people. I think it's people in general.
Sure. Well, here's
Yeah.
the thing. If I'm asking you, let's say, for example, you said to me, Joel, I want you to give a speech on astrophysics. I can assure you I'm not going to be very confident in that respect. If you ask me to do brain surgery tomorrow, I show up at the hospital, I scrub in, I'm not going to be very confident. All we have to realize is that part of our greatness is being who we are. And guess what? You can't be anybody else. There's no one else you can be. And so this is an opportunity for all of us to step into our power and say, I just want to be the best version of myself. Because guess what? I can't be Darren. Darren can't be me. I can't be anybody else out there, but you can be the best version of yourself. That's what it really comes down to. So when we talk about values, because I know this is going to come up as people read the book, and this has come up primarily with queer audiences, they'll say, well, this is great. You talk about these cultural values, but you're trying to say that we all act the same. And I said, well, that's not what cultural values mean. So, for example, one of the cultural values that I came across in my research is that, our community tends to be very community oriented. Now, the way that I express community is going to be different than how Darren expresses community. So for you, it might mean having a potluck. It might mean teaching a yoga class. It might be hosting this type of event or podcast or video or what have you. The way I express community is different. So what I'm saying is, in talking about these values, it is not a script to say that we all must act the same, which is where people, I sometimes think, then start losing confidence, because you're asking people to step outside of who they normally are and to act in ways that are different and ways that are apart from what they really stand for. All we're asking people to do is to be more true to who they already are, who they already know themselves to be. And no matter where you go, no matter what you do, no matter what you're called to do in life, you're not going to be able to get away from that. And so what I always say to people is, so it's probably best to get on with it and to get on with being yourself, because that is the greatest thing you can do, because each of us has a talent that we can share with the world that we are specifically uniquely ordained with. That's the opportunity.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes from Mother Teresa is, your part is but a drop in the ocean, but if that drop were missing, the ocean would feel empty.
I like that. You have to share that with me. I got Mother Teresa right behind me, but I like that. So I might replace that
I
with
love
what you
Mother
just
Teresa
said.
quotes. But I like that idea that we each have a small little part. It's so easy to look out at the world and all the brokenness everywhere and think, why bother? I'm never going to make a difference. But you have a small part to play. Sometimes you have a big part to play. But if you're not doing your part, if you're not stepping up and sharing whatever your gift is, then something's missing in the world.
I have
Go
just
ahead.
a quick story about that. I remember going to this leadership, this consultant meetup. It was in the Bay Area, and there was some hotshot guy who came in from New York or someplace like that. And let's just say his name was Dave. And Dave was telling everybody, this is what you should do. And this is how I built my business. And this is how I made my millions. And you saw all these people just just falling over themselves like fanboys and fangirls trying to connect with this guy and trying to emulate him and trying to talk like him and walk like him. And it was quite disappointing, because, again, you can't be anybody else but yourself. And so part of being a transformational leader is leaving the world in a better place, but doing it in a way that is unique to your particular sensibilities. So this isn't, again, asking you or anybody else to be a version of somebody else, but just to be yourself. And your queerness is not something that needs to be left behind. Your gayness is something that you can embrace, that you should nurture, that you can lead forward with, to say, this is something that's going to help me to be the best leader I can be. And it's not something that you have to hide, suppress, or repress, or leave on the shelf. That's the main thing I want people to be able to take away from this book.
Well, your book talks about leadership, and you've
Yes.
talked about this a lot already, but I'm wondering if you could just speak to it a little bit more, if in whatever way you feel inclined. Most people think of leadership as a political leader or a religious leader or the
Mm-hmm.
CEO of a company or the director of a nonprofit or a community organizer or leader. Um, but you're really expressing leadership comes at every level, and
Yeah.
it doesn't have to have a title and on your business card in order
Correct.
to be that. I'm wondering if you could say anything you want about that, about how each of us are potential leaders, at least.
Well, I think we all are leaders. So the question is, are you a good leader, or are you let's say, a bad leader? And guess what? you're going to fall into one of those two categories. Why? Because people are always watching you and because you're always having impact. Whatever you're doing is having ripple effects in the system, in the environment, in the world around you. So what I say to people is, since people are already naturally paying attention to you in some capacity, it's probably a good idea to be a good leader. Now, what does that look like? Again, it's about transforming the environment in a way that leaves a tangible, positive impact for those around. And most importantly, that means also transforming yourself. I always say, and we talked about this before, I like in this book, and what I do is decolonizing leadership, because yes, when you hear the term leadership, and when I have shopped this book and taken it into, let's say, queer bookshops or whatnot, people usually say, well, we don't have a business section. We don't have a management section. We don't do that. This isn't Forbes. This isn't a Wall Street Journal. I'm like, well, not asking you to be those. You lead by how you show up with your friends, how you show up with your colleagues, how you show up with your family, how you show up in the community, and how you show up in the world. But most importantly, when you look in the mirror and you lead yourself. Tell anybody, for example, who is involved with living is leading in some way. Now, the question is, are you leading yourself in such a way where you're honoring your values, you're being true to who you are living up you're living in a way that is helping you to maximize your purpose, your value, your wisdom, or you live in a way where you're running away from who you are? And this is an opportunity. So for anybody who's listening or watching this is basically the universe tapping you to say, it's time. We don't have time anymore for you to hide from who you are. In terms of, once you start leading yourself in a way, then you can start having the impact that you want with people around you. And what I always ask people is, what's your intent and how you want to lead? And are you actually seeing that in the environment? So for example, I know in my family, I can say to my husband, or I can say, yes, this is my intent. But then I need to actually check to see, does my intent actually match my impact? So if I say that I'm being a good husband and whatnot, does it actually show up on how I talk, how I communicate, how I do repair, how I support, how I nurture, how I hold space for him, how I create safety in the household? So that's where you have to do an inventory. That's where you have to have crucial and critical conversations to say, how am I showing up, and do an inventory and ask people around you, and also to ask yourself, where am I falling short? Which is sometimes a difficult question, but then it requires you, once you get the answers, and sometimes they're not always not the best answers, to say, there's opportunity for me to do more, and there's opportunity for me to show up in a different way. And there's always an opportunity. So any environment I find myself in, whether it's with clients, whether it's with friends, whether it's with family, when I look in the mirror, I have to ask myself, am I showing up in the way that I can be proud of how I'm leading my life, how I'm living my life, and how I'm engaging with and interacting with others? Which doesn't mean that you're necessarily standing on top of a mountain with a sword saying, I therefore am charging out to do X, Y, and Z. It's all about presence. And that's where I want all people to also focus on, is to not focus just on the doingness of leadership. Leadership is about beingness, your essence, how you show up as a person, and what people gather from you, even when you don't say a word, even when you're sitting in the room and you're following or listening to the tide, as it were, and what's happening around you. That's leadership.
Yeah. I think as you as you were talking, I was thinking about my mom,
Mm-hmm.
and my mom just prefers quiet privacy. The public speaking is like a fear worse than death for her. She just likes to sort of be in the background. But I think how much she has steered my life and so many other lives in her own quiet little way, that she wasn't like Tony Robbins bouncing around a stage, with the power words and everything, but how she steered my
Mm-hmm.
brother's life, my sister's life, and many other people that she's come into contact with. So I think, as you're saying, leadership just takes so many forms, and sometimes that soft, quiet leadership um, almost moves mountains. It just does it without a lot of fanfare. And yeah.
I would agree. I think in the forward of my book, I make reference to my mom, and I say that's the best leader I've known. And so it starts there. But what it also means too, and particularly in this day and age of social media, to be okay with how you show up, and how you take care of yourself, and how you exist without fanfare, without likes on Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok. How are you leading your life, and how are you existing? Are you existing in a way where you're basically just trying to get by? Are you trying to avoid scrutiny? Are you being self-evaluative? Are you trying to be performative? Or are you actually living in a way where there's some groundedness and there's some teeth to who you are? Like it's apparent in everything that you do. And that doesn't mean being the same. I mean, so part of being a good leader too is being able to say, I don't have it. I messed up. I got to do differently. I could look at myself and think how to do better. And I think that's the other aspect of leadership. So it's divorcing it from this hierarchical, patriarchal, a lot of essentially heteronormative way that we look at leadership, to say leadership can exist in many different ways at many different levels, but it first starts here.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about your work in your book specifically. Maybe you could say where people can find your book for starters, but also the other work you do and how people might be able to reach out and learn more about you, maybe connect with
Sure.
you if they need to.
Sure. Now, in this day and age, saying buy it on Amazon is probably not the most politically savvy thing to do. You can buy it at joeldavisbrown.com. You can buy it on Barnes and Noble. So those are some alternative places where you can find the book in terms of my work. I'm a professor, I'm a writer and a poet, and I'm an organizational development consultant. So what does that mean? I work in systems, civic, nonprofit, corporate, what have you, just to help people to work better together and to improve their leadership capability and to make sure that they're meeting the demands of their customers, clients, and the mission of their particular organization. That's what I do. So you can find me on Instagram, on LinkedIn, or just go to my website, or just walking down the street if you happen to be in San Francisco or New York on a nice sunny day.
Joel, you're amazing.
Thank
And
you. It's good to see you.
the only fault I have with you right now is that you moved to the other coast, so I can't see you all the time.
It's just splitting time, so I'll be back
thanks to
fairly soon.
thanks to the wonders of airplanes and Zoom,
Yeah.
you're not that far. I will put links to your book, to your website, and to your social media, so that people can connect with you more if they'd like. I will also put links to our Facebook group if you'd like to join and connect with other conscious gay men, as well as my work and some of the other things going on. Recently, I just started a gay men's Sangha group. It's in San Francisco, and we're doing an online version where you can do a little meditation, yoga, and I'm planning on bringing in some guest speakers, and I'm going to try and twist your arm, Joel, into being one of those guest speakers at some point in one of your trips back to the Bay Area. So you can keep track of all of that as well, and I will put links so that you can keep connected. If you have ideas for future guests or questions you'd like to address in this podcast, please drop them in the comments, as well as anything you'd like to drop for Joel or me, and we will keep an eye on the comments and do our best to respond. Joel, you are awesome, and I have to say, you reached out to me a couple weeks ago, and I, just the pandemic sort of scattered us to the wind, all of us, and I hadn't heard from you in a while, nor had I reached out, so it's on me. But I was, as soon as your face popped up on my phone, I was like, yay! It was like, the dopamine hit people get when they somebody likes something they post on Facebook or Instagram. Yeah. I get that when an old friend texts me randomly out of nowhere, and it makes me light up, and you made my day. And I'm really glad we had this conversation today.
Likewise. It's good to see you, as always, and looking forward to seeing you in person.